Artlist.io.
Welcome back to The Chill Pill, your brain stimulating podcast. Perfect for when you are drinking your morning coffee, driving, preparing for work, or simply looking for ways to chill. So, today we are going to get a bit serious with two major topics: the pandemic and energy. And on that note, we have invited two special guests who are scholars from IFP School, specializing in the mobility sector. So let us all welcome Mr. Hervé and Mr. Godefroy. So to introduce themselves, if I may ask Mr. Hervé to start.
Yeah, of course. Good morning, Carl, and good morning, Godefroy. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I hope I will have a very funny and educative moment. To introduce myself, I'm Hervé Balla. I'm a student in the IFP School in the Energy and Product Program. My study training deal with derivative petroleum, such as lubricants and fuel, and all the aspects to make them more clean. I think I'm directly concerned by the team. So
Thank you so much, Mr. Hervé. Now let's hear from Mr. Godefroy.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Godefroy, and I'm just like Hervé, studying at IFP School. So I'm studying a program that is called MOT, and it mainly focuses on engines and powertrains, but also energies. And I'm really looking forward to the debate we can have this morning about the pandemic and energies and how it affected emissions and pollution worldwide. I think as students we have to be concerned about it, and it will be our role in the future to help reduce emissions. So yeah.
Thank you so much to the two of you for your introduction. And yes, I agree. Today we are going to focus on how the pandemic affected the engineering sector. So first of all, let's talk about COVID-19. I know you're probably tired of this topic, but it's important to define what we have in front of us. So the first case we know appeared in Wuhan, China in 2019 in the month of December. And now we have almost 100 million people worldwide who have contracted the disease. And to add more bad news, we had 2 million deaths. And it's worrisome because the growth of these numbers are at an exponential rate. And what can we do? Or how can we use this to our advantage as humans? So I would like to ask our guests, how did the pandemic change your lives, your working habits, or anything in your life? Please enlighten us, Mr. Godefroy.
Yeah, so the pandemic really changed a lot our lives, I think. First of all, as students, we obviously couldn't go to school anymore. So we had to follow online courses, which I think is the case for more students all around the world. But we had the great chance to have really good tools such as Teams or Zoom, which could allow us to still being able to follow the courses from home. Which was really good for the pandemic, but also for us. And also at IFP School, many students are doing apprenticeship, and I'm part of those. And unfortunately, I couldn't go every day at the office, so we had to work from home. And once again, this was done using Teams mainly, and so it wasn't as good as being able to go on site, obviously, but still we managed to do the job and still being able to learn like so many things through the apprenticeship. So it was a big change, but in the end we pretty much got used to it, and I think that's the best thing.
Mr. Hervé, if you could enlighten us about your experiences.
yes, I agree with Godefroy. because the pandemic changed a lot our working habit. Thanks, we have some tools like Teams or Zoom provided by IFP to do our courses. But it was very the 2020 years was very different from the other years in terms of study or in terms of social activities or things like that. It was very full of maybe stress for those who are not really, who don't have really habit to stay at home. So
I agree with the two of you. So the lives of people around the world have changed in a way that we merged our workplaces and our homes into one thing. So here in France, in fact, we have curfews to try to contain this pandemic, all while we have the vaccination drives in Europe. So from what I have learned from the two of you, you are specializing in the mobility sector. Perhaps you could give our audiences and some information, some relevant information on how the pandemic impacted numbers in terms of, let's say, transport. Mr. Hervé, if you'd like to start.
okay, so in terms of transport, due to the spontaneity of the crisis, governments took a lot of decision to contain the diseases, especially the global lockdown. Those decisions trigger many change of habit in the transport fields. We noticed the reduction of aircraft traffic between 51 and 88%. Like you can see the difference between the air traffic in April 2019 and April 2020 in the comparative maps. It affects especially aircraft passenger. For the maritime transportation, we notice a diminution of about 5 to 20% of the ship traffic. And the main impact was in the car mobility, with a diminution of 50 to 75%.
I see. So we've seen really a big decrease in the rate of transportation, for example, aircrafts and cars especially, but not much effect on maritime. So, Mr. Godefroy, if I may direct this question to you, since you are an apprentice working in the mobility industry, how did this affect the numbers in the industries?
So yeah, the industry was really affected. But just before, I wanted to highlight the fact that the reduction in transportation had a really good consequence, and it's shown on this the presentation. So we can see that obviously transportation was highly reduced, and this is what Hervé pointed out. But on the other hand, we had really strong rise in bike traffic. So we see here, for example, 13% of increase of bicycle traffic in the country, which is really good for the environment, and this is obviously because people wanted to respect social distancing. So this was really good for the pandemic, but also really good for our cities to, for example, follow a little bit the example of Netherlands on this point, and also the pictures on the slide are very interesting. We can see a really crowded street in 2019, and nobody in the street in 2020. So it's really shocking image, and it's quite impressive. So yeah, you wanted to talk, sorry, about the industry. So So of course we had a really big impact on the industry this year, mainly because many factories had to close because people were pretty much forced to stay at home to work, and they were not all really prepared for it. They had to close, and also some factories couldn't sell what they were producing. So for this reason also they had to close. So it really changed the way we consumed energy this year, both this working from home and also closed factories. So if we take, for example, the fact that we work from home a lot, we can see that it changed a lot the energy demand. So the first really big impact is the reduction of the energy demand by almost 4% all around the world. So this is an average for every country, but also for every time at the year. But obviously during the lockdowns, this reduction was really bigger than 4%. What we saw, for example, was a decrease of about 20% of the electricity demand in France during lockdowns, and this figure would climb to up to 30% in Italy. So really a big change in the energy demand, and that's pretty much the case for every type of energy, as we can see here, and that's was really I think a big struggle for energy suppliers. But what we see overall is that we had a really good impact on green energies. So that was the main thing, and yeah, that's mainly what I've learned from this pandemic about energy consumption.
All right. So to confirm, if I may ask, so this growth that we see below in the graphs or the diagram, this speaks about green energy. So there has been a boost. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly. I think Hervé maybe can talk a bit about
yes.
This.
Yes, you are right, because we seen that there was a very increase of the renewable uses, as you see, plus 7%, and and um, uh, and I think the renewable energy are the big winner of the COVID-19 crisis, because they really increase their part in the energy mix, and they are even more great than coal energy. So and also to add a little bit information on what Godefroy was saying regarding the global energy demand, we see that there is a drawback of minus 3.8% in the total global demand. And we also see the increase of home working by approximately 30% for countries like France or Spain, referring to Google data. Or we also see seeing during the pandemic increase of video call activities, or things activities like that to get in touch with others.
I agree.
Sorry, Karl. Yeah, just to add few figures maybe for our audience this morning. I think the most significant number we can put on this is the fact that this is the biggest shock in energy demand since 70 years, and so it dates back to World War period. So it's very important, and we see overall that depending on the policy in the country, we have different reduction in energy demand. So, for example, if the policy is about strict restriction, of movements, we have about 10% reduction in energy demand. However, if the policy is more about a partial lockdown, we are about 20%, and this number can increase to up to 25% of energy demand reduction if the country is under full lockdown. So that was just to add a few figures to that we can emphasize on the impact of the lockdowns on the energy demand.
Thank you so much for these insights on how the change in our habits actually impacted the energy demand. So, to summarize, we've seen that there has been a big decrease in transport, and also with our change in habits, we have cost reductions in the energy demand, but then we see a boost in green energy. And that is interesting because that brings us to the topic of climate change and pollution. And to zoom closer to the mobility sector, let's talk about emissions. What would you, as young professionals yourselves, would like to share with our audiences on emissions?
So yeah, the first thing I wanted to say about CO2 emissions is obviously how can we quantify those? Well, we cannot really measure it. We cannot measure the CO2 emissions at every time all around the world. It's not possible. It's not possible because we have many ways of emitting CO2, but also, for example, due to the wind effect, we cannot really quantify it this way. So the way it's done is that we have models, so scientific built models, and they use some input data, such as measure in some places, and they are able to feed the model to be able to predict the CO2 emissions, and also to quantify it on a live basis. So it's very interesting to see that, and there are different websites on where you can find this kind of data. So I would like to mention the Global Carbon Project, and also the website that's called Carbon Monitor. And these are researchers which are quantifying the CO2 emissions every day. And most of our data we know comes from this website actually. So what we saw is that CO2 emissions were really highly reduced during the year, and this reduction could go to up to 13% in some countries, such as Spain, for example, which really suffered from really strict and long lockdowns. So lockdowns really had a strong effect on CO2 emissions, and this is what we can see on the graph actually. We see that during the period of March, April, and May, during which many countries were under lockdowns, we see a really strong reduction of CO2 emissions. But during the other months, the reduction is not that big. It's about 5% compared to our baseline, which is 2019. We can see that ground transport plays a really significant role in this reduction. So I think it's really an important thing to figure out and to emphasize on as future powertrain engineer. It's very important. It shows the fact that we really need to improve on CO2 emissions regarding to ground transportation. So buses, trucks, and cars. It's a very important thing. But also the aircraft traffic goes to really high reduction of the CO2 emissions. So both of these were responsible for a big part of it, but also the industry. So I don't know, Hervé, if you have maybe other figures to add to the one I have.
Yes, as Godefroy say, concerning the impact of the COVID crisis on CO2 emission, according to the International Environment Agency, we can notice that there is a reduction of about 7% of the global CO2 emission, which correspond to something like 34.1 gigatons of CO2, which wasn't emitted during the 2020 year. I think all those reductions are good, but it's important to say that the drop in the CO2 emission in 2020 had no detected impact on the atmospheric CO2 or the climate change. It is extremely small compared to all the emission accumulated so far. We have to make more effort. To emphasize regarding the greenhouse, the other greenhouse gases like NOx, we observe a big improvement. For example, in France, there is a decrease of about 50 or 52% of the NO2 concentration in the air, and even 61% in countries like Spain. But there are also side effects of the crisis, such as increase of the residential CO2 emission by 10%, and also the increase of the pollution due to face mass production or alcoholic production or something like that. So
Thank you so much for your insights. So we've seen that in terms of emissions, as Mr. Godefroy has explained to us, there should be a measuring factor. We measure it. It depends on how we measure it before we will be able to define it. And then, as Mr. Hervé mentioned to us, that is very interesting. If our reduction of emissions is in fact enough to battle climate change, and with our new habits, with the masks and the hydroalcoholic solution in our pockets all the time, are we really contributing to saving the planet?
Yes, and about this, Karl, I just wanted to add that, for example, there are companies that are really pushing for new regulamentations to be postponed. So, for example, in the plastic industry, a lot of plastic was used to invent new packages to be able to reduce the spread of the pandemic, and those new packages of product really use a lot of plastic. So some companies try to use this argument to try to postpone new regulamentations, and I think it was also a bit the case in the automotive industry. So there are really strong drawbacks, and plastic usage is really one of them with COVID-19. So I hope that in the future we'll be able to first come back to the plastic usage we had before the crisis, and really be able to quickly reduce this plastic consumption in everything, I would say, in packages, but not only in the products we buy. So yeah, I'm quite concerned from my side about plastic production.
I agree very much with you on that. And we see that it is a challenge to always find the best compromise that would work for everyone, for every economy all around the globe. So this remains a challenge, especially for us engineers. And to just go over a few figures with you guys, I'd like to show you some economic forecasts. And if you have comments, feel free to tell our audience.
Just one comment before we go through the figures. I just wanted to say to our auditors that for those who want to go further into the subject of emission and pollution during the year, there are really incredible pictures on the internet, and you can find them really easily that really highlight the difference in pollution in many countries between this year and last year. So just don't hesitate to Google it. There's a lot of very interesting information that are really easy to grab. So yeah, sorry, Karl, for the interruption.
No problem. I suggest the same thing to our audiences. So let's see here some information we got from the site of OECD for the year 2020. It has been established that for 2020, there has been a negative 4.2% decrease in the world GDP, and it is expected to bounce back again, a positive 4.2% for the year 2021. So it is quite optimistic, if I may say. And to look at it by countries, let's see some forecasts. So to give you an insight on how it's going with economies around the globe, we have the US, which experienced a negative 3.7 in 2020, but is expected to bounce back to 2021 at 3.2, a positive 3.2, and a positive 3.5 for 2022. So we see that it is expecting maintained growth. On the other hand, we have France and China, who are quite the same in their model. Although France experienced a big GDP decrease at negative 9.1 in 2020, but for 2021, a big bounce back to a positive 6.0 is expected, and is expected to be at a steadier state for 2022 at positive 3.3. China, on the other hand, interestingly, did not experience a negative GDP for 2020, but instead only had a positive 1.8, which is quite small. But then it is expected to bounce back to a positive 8 for 2021 and be at a steadier state for the following years. So taking into account two other countries, if I may say, India experienced negative 9.9 decrease in GDP for 2020, but is expected to bounce back to 2021 at 7.9 and be at a steadier state on 2022. And for Japan, negative 5.3 to positive 2.3 to 2021 and at a steadier state in 2022. But what can we see from all these figures? We see that there is optimism. For the euro area, since we are studying in Europe, we have seen a decline of 7.5% in the GDP, but we are expecting to bounce back to 3.5 and 3.25% for 2021 and 2022 respectively. So in terms of policies, it has been established that vaccination drives will continue, but before we are able to achieve something with that, outbreaks will be dealt with by containment measures such as lockdowns and curfews. But then it is good to see that there is optimism for the economy, not just of the European area, not just of France, but for the globe entirely. And I think that gives us a ray of hope for the world. And I agree with the two of you that COVID became an eye-opener for all of us in a way that we've seen a clean slate or table rase in the engineering perspective that we can reach emissions that will help us battle climate change. So if you have final thoughts that you would like to share with us, please do so.
Yeah. So I think my final thought would be that I really hope we can seize the opportunity of this bounce back to be able to include in our daily lives and economy and everything, basically, the fact that we need to reduce CO2 emissions, and I think that really COVID-19 has shown that we can do it. We can live and be able to work without emitting as much CO2 as what we were used to do. So that's really the thing. We need to include this, and COVID has shown that it's possible. We can do it. That's my final thought.
In my point of view, I think one of the main resolution of the COP21 is to maintain the global warming on the 2 degrees Celsius bar. To reach this objective, we have to reduce our emission by approximately 5% each year. COVID-19 was a good eyes opener because it showed us which kind of sacrifice we have to do in order to fulfill this 2 degrees Celsius goal. So the real question for me is, are we ready to do this kind of sacrifice, or are there a better way to fulfill the COP21 objective without locking down the entire world population? For me, we have to find concrete and concrete answer for those questions, and I think it will be really interesting and challenging the technological issue engineers will bring in order to win this amazing challenge.
I agree very much with the two of you on those insights. Yes, with COVID, we have seen an eye opener in a way that although we are in sort of dark ages, there is always a light at the end of that tunnel. And I hope that that light means another renaissance period for humans, in which we will be able to use technology to our advantage and battle climate change altogether, especially for us engineers. And we are lucky we have these tools like Zoom or Teams where we get to meet. And we have institutions like IFP School that continuously trains engineers to solve the climate issue. So thank you so much to our two guests for today for sharing their experiences, their knowledge, their insights. And to our audiences, don't forget to comment down below if you have reflections, arguments, questions. Feel free to talk to us and we will listen to you. So thank you so much, and I wish you all a good day.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Carl. Thank you, Carl.